This story didn't begin with luxury. It began with a promise and a foolish bargain. My name is Jean Dunford, and 10 years ago, my wife Jean and I bought a small shack by Rain Cove for $5. It wasn't a home. It was the suggestion of one, a weather-beaten storage shed clinging to the most beautiful slice of lakefront in the county. The deal began as a joke with the old owner, who just wanted to be rid of it. $5, he said, if we promised to haul away the mess. We shook hands under the fading light, laughing at what we both knew was madness. But there was something sacred about paying for it, about owning even a ruin by choice rather than by accident. The shack was a ruin, every corner holding a memory of neglect, but we saw potential. Jean saw possibility in the wreckage. She was the numbers and drone person, was the wood and wire guy. Between us, we had just enough stubbornness to believe we could make it livable. We spent that first autumn clearing brush, patching holes, and discovering that every nail we pulled revealed another problem. Jean joked the house was testing us, to see if we truly deserved it. For 10 long years, we poured sweat, savings, and what remained of our youth into that shack. We replaced every board, every pipe, every wire, until the old structure had turned into a cedar and glass marvel that stretched along the curve of the lake like it had always belonged there. Morning sunlight hit the windows in warm sheets of gold, and the air inside smelled of wood oil and clean rain. Visitors said it felt like stepping into a dream, but to us, it was simply home. We called it Jean's Promise. We never planned to sell it. We built it for peace, not profit. But peace has a way of attracting envy. Our masterpiece, our $5 million miracle born from a $5 shell, caught the eye of Karen Lucas, the president of the Rain Cove County Homeowners Association. Karen was the kind of woman who mistook control for order, who thought every blade of grass and every mailbox existed to serve her sense of perfection. Her hair was always immaculate, her voice smooth as paperwork, and her smile the kind that belonged to someone already writing a complaint in her mind. She decided, quite calmly, that our home would look much better if it were hers, or at least, if it fell under her authority. I'd always been a patient man. Jean used to say my patience moved like a glacier, slow to start, but unstoppable once in motion. Karen Lucas would soon learn what that meant. The first time she came down our gravel drive, the world felt deceptively ordinary. It was a mild spring afternoon, the kind where the air smelled of cedar dust and thawed soil. I was on the dock replacing a warped plank when her white SUV appeared at the bend of the road. The tires crunched against the gravel like someone walking across fresh snow. I looked up and saw her step out, clipboard in hand, wearing that crisp confidence of someone who believes their arrival is an event. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She walked straight to me, heels sinking slightly into the damp earth, and said, "Mr. Dunford, you've received an official notice." Her voice was clipped, the tone of bureaucracy disguised as courtesy. She handed me a paper stamped in red across the top mandatory property buyback and community integration offer. I read the heading twice, convinced it was a joke. She stood waiting, lips pressed together like a teacher watching a slow student. According to her, our property qualified for compulsory reintegration under Article 9, Section 4 of the HOA bylaws. The proposal demanded that we sell the property back to the association for the original purchase price, plus a nominal consideration for approved improvements. I asked. "You mean $5? Karen didn't flinch. She told me to vacate within 72 hours after signing. Jean, who had been sanding the deck rail behind me, lowered her goggles and said evenly, "Does that buyback come with a free unicorn? Or is that a separate form?" Karen blinked, uncertain whether to feel insulted or superior. Then she left as abruptly as she had arrived, her SUV leaving a thin veil of dust over our gravel path. That night, Jean spread the HOA bylaws across our kitchen table, her fingers tracing every clause with surgical precision. There was no Article 9. Section 4, about any mandatory buyback. The section she referenced actually covered community landscaping standards and voluntary improvement programs. Karen had invented a law that didn't exist. We decided to do nothing, no calls, no replies, no panic. We would wait and see how far she was willing to push a lie. Patience, after all, was our oldest skill. Absurd violation notices piled up, from my blue kayak to the dock. Jean logged everything in a folder she called the Book of Stupid. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding. Karen wasn't a woman who settled for mockery. Her obsession carried the weight of someone planning a conquest. Each notice, each threat, was a brick in a wall she was building around us. Yet under all that arrogance, I sensed fear, the kind born from realizing someone's happiness cannot be regulated. Jean said we should document everything, every interaction, every word. She started using her drone to record wide sweeps of the property, from the mailbox to the dock. Just in case, she said. One evening, while the sun melted into the lake and painted the glass walls amber, Jean stood beside me on the dock. "You think she'll stop?" she asked. I told her no. People like Karen never stop until someone teaches them what boundaries mean. Jean smiled faintly. Then we'll teach her. I looked at the water, calm and endless, and thought about how long glaciers take to carve mountains. Patience. Yes, but once they move, they reshape everything. The morning, Karen returned. The lake was still, glazed with the kind of light that made the surface look solid. I was working on the dock again, driving new screws into the cedar boards. From the corner of my eye, I saw that same white SUV roll up our gravel path, slow and deliberate, like a ship docking in calm water. Jean watched from the porch, coffee mug in hand. Karen stepped out, immaculate as ever, the kind of woman who never seemed to sweat. She greeted us as if the last conversation had never happened, unfolding her clipboard like a stage prop. "Mr. and Mrs. Dunford," she began. "The association has reconsidered its offer. I'm here to finalize your compliance." Her tone carried a calm certainty that felt rehearsed. I wiped my hands on my jeans and asked what exactly she meant by finalize. She handed me a new envelope, thicker than the first, embossed with the HOA seal. Inside were typed pages, dense with legal language and bold headlines. It read like a contract drawn from thin air, the Rain Cove Community Integration Program. According to it, our property failed to meet aesthetic and social alignment standards, and therefore qualified for a mandatory buyback and reintegration. Jean laughed softly, that dangerous laugh she used when someone underestimated her. "You're saying our home doesn't align socially?" Karen nodded, entirely serious, as if repeating a doctrine. Jean took the document and skimmed it. "There's no legal basis for this," she said. "Not in the bylaws, not in the county registry." Karen's smile never cracked. "You'll want to reconsider. The board is unanimous. If you don't comply, we'll have to pursue enforcement through municipal coordination." I watched her say the words with that practiced elegance, the way people do when they're bluffing, but don't know they're transparent. Jean asked what kind of enforcement she meant. Karen's answer was simple: fines, liens, and eventual forfeiture. For a moment, silence hung between us. A gull passed overhead, its reflection slicing the water below. Jean looked at me, then at Karen. "You can't take what you don't own," she said quietly. "And you don't own this land." Karen snapped her clipboard shut, turning toward her car. "You'll hear from us soon." When she drove away, the smell of dust lingered longer than it should have, like a warning left behind. I stood there with the paper in my hands, reading the words over and over until they stopped making sense. Somewhere between the legal jargon and the arrogance, I felt something shift, a storm quietly gathering. The first notice came 3 days later, a fine for unauthorized exterior modifications. Then another for unapproved vegetation overgrowth. Within 2 weeks, we'd collected 8 separate penalties totaling nearly $8,000. Jean filed everyone under a new tab in our binder. labeling it fictional debts. She started scanning them, cross-referencing each violation with property codes and county laws. It became her nightly ritual. She'd pour a glass of wine, open her laptop, and mutter, "If they're going to play paperwork games, they picked the wrong opponent." I didn't argue. I just made sure the security cameras stayed recording 24 hours a day. Karen escalated. She began sending letters marked "Final Notice," even when no previous warnings existed. Each one carried a tone of bureaucratic menace, signed in perfect cursive: failure to comply, pending action, community harmony. The language was always polished, never emotional, as if cruelty could sound polite. Jean drafted a response quoting federal property statutes, attaching photos and timestamps proving our compliance. We mailed it certified, with copies to the county clerk. Still, more notices arrived, sometimes 2 in a single day. The mailbox became a daily ritual of dread. By mid-June, the letters changed tone. They weren't threats anymore. They were debts. According to the HOA's accounting ledger, we owed $87,000 in accumulated penalties. The number was fiction, built from nonsense, but it was printed on official letterhead, which made it dangerous. 2 days later, our bank called. The loan officer, a soft-spoken man named Mark, sounded apologetic. He said the HOA had filed a lien against our property, which placed us in technical default on our mortgage. If it wasn't cleared within 30 days, the bank would be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings. I remember gripping the phone so tight that my knuckles went white. Jean stayed calm. She always did. Dark. "Let them," she said. "We'll peel every lie off that paper." But I could hear the tremor in her voice. We weren't just dealing with a woman's obsession anymore. This was a machine, cold, procedural, designed to suffocate through legality. That night, we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. The glow of the desk lamp turned the stacks of documents into miniature towers. Jean drew a simple diagram: HOA on one side, bank on the other, us in between. "They're using the bank to pressure us," she said. "Karen doesn't need to win a case. She just needs to exhaust us." I didn't sleep much after that. At dawn, I walked out to the dock, the air cool and wet, mist rising off the lake in thin ribbons. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror waiting to break. I thought of Jean asleep inside, of the years we spent rebuilding what the world had forgotten. I'd rebuilt houses, circuits, engines, but nothing compared to rebuilding hope. And now, that hope was being auctioned by a woman with a clipboard. That morning, I decided something: we wouldn't just defend ourselves. We'd expose her. Jean documented every interaction, from drone footage to emails and violation letters, creating a detailed, color-coded archive. Every violation was dissected like a case file. When Karen's maintenance inspectors appeared uninvited, Jean recorded them from the porch, narrating the date and time aloud. "This isn't just harassment," she said one evening. "It's fraud." I watched her, the glow of her laptop reflecting off her glasses, and realized she was no longer scared. She was strategizing. That look in her eyes reminded me of the night we first stood on the dock a decade ago, promising to rebuild the ruin no one believed in. But Karen wasn't done. The following Friday, I came home to find 2 men in navy jackets photographing our property from the edge of the yard. Their car idled on the gravel road. Logo of the HOA stamped near the door. I walked over, asked what they were doing. The taller one adjusted his camera strap and said, "Routine compliance inspection, sir." His tone was professionally polite, the kind that pretends to ask while already taking. I told him this was private property. He smiled faintly and said, "Common access." Then they left, leaving tire tracks across the grass. Jean watched from the window, whispering, "She's getting desperate." That night, thunder rolled over the lake, low and distant. I sat by the window, staring at the flashing reflection of lightning on the water. Karen's campaign had turned from irritation to invasion, from paper to people. Every flash of light made the trees look like they were moving. somewhere inside that restless silence, I felt a calm resolve settle in. If Karen wanted a war of patience, she'd chosen the wrong man. The next move would be ours, and it would start with the truth buried deeper than any bylaw she'd ever written. By July, our home had become a fortress made of paper. The dining table disappeared beneath stacks of envelopes, notices, certified letters, and photocopies of bylaws that never existed. Jean called it the wall of false debts. It grew taller each week, layered with the language of intimidation phrases like non-compliance, community penalty, and immediate forfeiture. Each letter was crafted to sound final, official, and inevitable. I started to recognize Karen's rhythm in them, a cadence of control disguised as professionalism. Even the font felt smug. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing quietly, wondering if she truly believed a letterhead could replace a conscience. But the laughter faded whenever I saw Jean's eyes scanning those documents late into the night. She wasn't afraid, but she was angry in a way I'd never seen before measured, deliberate and deeply personal. Her spreadsheets tracked every date, every clause, every false signature. She color-coded the fraud like a cartographer mapping enemy territory. "Every lie leaves a pattern," she said, fingers gliding over her laptop keys. "And if there's a pattern, there's a plan." She was right. Each violation wasn't random. They followed a timeline, escalating just enough to keep pressure on the bank. Karen wasn't trying to prove we'd done something wrong. She was trying to make us look insolvent. The heat that summer was oppressive. Mornings smelled of hot pine and metal, and even the lake seemed tired. I spent my days outside, working on maintenance to keep my hands busy. The dock needed sealing again, and I found peace in the rhythm of the brush forward, back, forward, back. At night, the air conditioner hummed over Jean's printer. The glow from her screen spilled into the hallway, soft and cold. She'd stopped playing music while she worked. Silence had become her shield. Every so often, she'd pause, lean back, and murmur, "She's crossing into criminal territory." It was around that time that we received a call from the county assessor's office. A polite woman named Linda explained that someone had filed for a property value reassessment, claiming our improvements violated environmental zoning restrictions. The claim came from the HOA. Jean put her on speaker and asked, "Did they provide documentation?" Linda hesitated, then said, "They attached photographs and a statement of excessive development." Jean smiled without humor. "Photographs," she repeated. "Taken from where the next day?" She checked our cameras. The two men from the Navy SUV had returned, this time with tripods. They hadn't even tried to hide. Jean compiled the footage, time-stamped and annotated. She submitted it to the county clerk, along with a sworn statement of harassment. "Paper for paper," she said. "Let's see how they like it." That night, as we reviewed the footage together, something caught my attention, a brief reflection in the SUV's windshield. A logo, not just HOA branding, but the emblem of Sterling Development Group, a real estate firm I'd seen on billboards near the highway. "They're not just harassing us," I said quietly. "They're scouting." Jean looked at the paused frame, the outline of the logo crisp against the sunlight. "Developers," she whispered. "That's what this is about." Jean uncovered Sterling Development's plot. The HOA's violations were a pretext to acquire our lakefront property, the fifth of 5 lots for a luxury marina. Jean found the project proposal buried in the county's online registry under pending review. She printed it, 3 pages long, dated 2 months before the first violation notice we'd received. The document listed Rain Cove Community Cooperative as a supporting partner. Karen's signature sat neatly at the bottom. When Jean handed it to me, I didn't speak for a full minute. The truth had a way of making silence feel like an explosion. That evening, I walked down to the dock. The lake shimmered under a red sunset, quiet and watchful. I thought about Jean's patience, her endless ability to analyze while I built, her calm precision that could turn chaos into order. And I thought about Karen, so sure of her dominion, believing power was something you could print on paper. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was clarity. If this were about land, then land would be our answer. The next morning, we drove to the county records office. The building was old, brick with faded lettering above the door. Inside, the air smelled of dust and toner. Jean explained what we were looking for: the original deed to our property, predating the HOA. The clerk, an older man named Gerald, adjusted his glasses and disappeared into the archives. We waited nearly an hour before he returned, holding a thick binder wrapped in twine. "This one goes back to 1895, he said. The parchment inside was brittle but legible. As Jean read the first paragraph, her eyes widened. "Lane," she whispered. "This deed lists riparian rights exclusive, perpetual, and transferable." The language was clear. The property line extended 50 feet beyond the high water mark, granting full control over the adjoining water access. Most importantly, the deed stated that these rights precede and supersede all future covenants or community agreements. The HOA, founded in 1988, had no authority here. John exhaled slowly. "This isn't just a loophole," she said. "It's a wall of law." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The glacier had begun to move. Back home, Jean scanned every page, uploading backups to multiple drives. She framed a copy of the deed and hung it in the living room above the fireplace. "Our insurance policy," she said. That night, we talked about the next steps. She wanted to present the document to the HOA board formally. On record, I wanted to go further. "Let's not warn them," I said. "Let's let them build their case, deeper and deeper, until the weight of it crushes itself." John nodded slowly, understanding. Patience again weaponized this time. In the days that followed, Karen's pressure campaign intensified. The HOA began sending representatives instead of letters. A man in a gray suit showed up claiming to be from Community Compliance Enforcement. Jean met him at the door, recorder running, and asked for identification. He couldn't provide any. She thanked him politely and closed the door. Later that night, we watched the footage together. Jean paused the video, zooming in on his clipboard. The logo in the top right corner matched Sterling Development's letterhead. The connection was now undeniable. It was no longer just harassment. It was a conspiracy, a coordinated attempt to seize land through manufactured debt and fraudulent enforcement. Jean drafted a detailed report for the State Attorney General's office. She called it Pattern of Collusion Rain Cove County, HOA, and Sterling Development Group. As she wrote, her tone was steady, professional, not fueled by anger, but by clarity. She didn't want revenge. She wanted truth. I realized then that what we were fighting for wasn't just our house. It was proof that patience, when guided by principle, could outlast corruption. The next morning, Jean walked down to the dock. The air was cool, the lake glassy. She placed her hand on the cedar railing we had built together. "You know," she said quietly, "she thinks this is about money." I nodded. "It's never about money," I said. "It's about control." Jean looked out at the water, the reflection of the sky trembling across its surface. "Then let's show her what she can't control." The storm arrived without warning. It wasn't the kind that crept in from the horizon, but one that seemed to appear fully formed above the lake, rolling with electricity and intent. The air thickened, charged, every gust of wind carrying the taste of rain and rust. I was in the workshop tightening a set of hinges when the power flickered, then died completely. The house went silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Outside, lightning cracked against the water, illuminating the dock in stuttering flashes. That's when I heard it, the faint scrape of metal against wood, followed by the groan of something heavy shifting where it shouldn't. Jean appeared at the doorway, flashlight in hand, her voice low but steady. "Someone's at the dock," she said. The wind swallowed her words, but her eyes said the rest. We stepped out into the storm. boots sinking into wet earth. The beam of her light cut through sheets of rain, finding movement at the far edge of the water. Two figures in dark jackets crouched near the mooring posts, working fast, hands on the bolts that held our dock to its anchors. One carried a crowbar, the other a set of wrenches glinting under the lightning. For a moment, the scene looked almost surreal, two silhouettes framed by a white flash. Thieves trying to unmake what we had built, one board at a time. In the storm, two intruders tried to dismantle the dock. I confronted them. One fled. The other barely escaped. Jean recorded everything and called the authorities. I grabbed the iron tire bar from the shed door and ran. Jean's voice followed me through the rain, calling my name, but I was already too far gone for reason. When I reached the dock, the men scattered. One sprinted toward the shore, slipping on the wet planks. The other swung the crowbar wide. A blind, desperate arc. I ducked, the bar whistling past my ear, and shoved him backward. He stumbled, lost footing, and went over the edge with a splash so loud it seemed to silence the storm for an instant. The second man froze, torn between helping his partner and escaping. He chose the latter, sprinting up the path toward the tree line. Jean was already on the phone with emergency dispatch, her voice sharp, precise, relaying every detail. Two intruders, dark clothing, attempting property damage, possible assault. By the time the sheriff's deputies arrived, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. Their lights cut blue arcs across the lake, reflecting off the ripples like shards of glass. They found the soaked man clinging to a piece of driftwood near the shore, shivering but alive. The other was nowhere to be seen. I gave my statement, every detail measured, each fact documented. Jean showed them the video she'd captured, clear footage of both faces, the tools, the license plate of their truck parked up the road. The deputy watched in silence, then exhaled through his teeth. "These guys belong to the HOA?" he asked. Jean nodded. "Or they're contractors," she said. The deputies took the evidence, promising to file trespassing and attempted property damage charges. Before leaving, one of them lingered by the porch, studying the structure of our dock through the mist. "You folks sure made something special here," he said softly. His words hung there, fragile but sincere, after they left. Jean and I stood at the edge of the dock, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked cedar. The section they'd tried to remove tilted slightly, one bolt half-sheared. They wanted the whole thing gone. Jean whispered. "They wanted proof this place could fall apart," I nodded, feeling the truth of it. But proof, like patience, can work both ways. The following morning, the sun rose clean and gold over Rain Cove. Mist curled off the surface of the water. Gentle as breath, the lake had a way of pretending nothing had happened. I walked the shoreline, inspecting the damage. Footprints still marked the mud near the posts, and tire tracks curved back toward the main road. Jean joined me with a mug of coffee, her voice hoarse from the long night. "They crossed the line," she said. "Now it's not just harassment, it's criminal." She was right, and for the first time, I sensed that Karen's perfect mask was beginning to crack. Later that afternoon, the sheriff returned with news. The man pulled from the lake had confessed that he'd been hired for maintenance work under direction from the HOA board. He mentioned a woman named Lucas by name, said they were told to retrieve HOA property before it was illegally modified. The sheriff smirked bitterly. Doesn't take much translation to figure out what that means. Jean thanked him, then quietly handed him a flash drive containing copies of all our footage and documents. "Keep one safe," she said. "You'll need it when the attorneys start calling." That evening, as the light faded, Jean set up her drone, the one she used to survey our property. She programmed it to fly a wide perimeter, capturing every angle of the dock and the surrounding shore. The footage glowed on her laptop screen, crystalline and undeniable. "We're going to present this," she said, publicly, in front of everyone. I looked at her, the calm certainty in her eyes, and realized she wasn't planning to just defend our home anymore. She was preparing to expose everything The fraud, the lies, the collusion. The storm had changed her. It had changed both of us. That night, long after she went to bed, I stayed on the porch, the air still humming with leftover energy from the lightning. I thought about Karen Lucas sitting somewhere in her pristine house, believing she still controlled the story. But control is fragile. It breaks the moment truth touches it. In the reflection of the dark lake, I saw our home glowing faintly behind me, a warm, steady light against the vast black water. The dock creaked softly, alive again, somewhere deep in the woods. A siren wailed and faded. I closed my eyes, knowing this was only the midpoint. The next move wouldn't be made with anger, it would be made with precision. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, 6 p.m. sharp, inside the Rain Cove Community Hall, a building that smelled of varnish and entitlement. Its wooden floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the walls were lined with framed photographs of smiling board members, each one staring down like portraits of authority. Jean and I arrived early, our folder of documents tucked neatly beneath her arm. The deed from 1895 sat on top, a relic of ink and law older than anyone in that room. People filtered in, murmuring, curious. Most had no idea what the meeting was truly about. They came expecting another round of routine agenda items, maintenance budgets, parking disputes, landscaping rules. They didn't know the ground beneath their feet was about to shift. Karen arrived last, exactly on time, as if the universe operated by her schedule. She swept into the room in a tailored navy suit, pearls at her throat, clipboard in hand. The room hushed almost instinctively, a reflex learned through years of intimidation. "Let's bring this meeting to order," she said, tapping the microphone. Her voice carried that same polished certainty, the tone of someone who believed in hierarchy more than justice. She glanced briefly in our direction, her smile thin, calculated. "Mr. and Mrs. Dunford, I understand you have a grievance to present," she said. "We'll hear it after the board reviews pending violations." Jean didn't move. She simply opened the folder and placed the first sheet on the table before us, waiting. Karen continued with her agenda, reading off a list of violations in her efficient monotone excessive noise, improper dock maintenance, and non-conforming mailbox design. Each one carried our name. The words fell like stones, rehearsed and hollow. When she finished, she looked up, satisfied. "Now," she said, "the board will entertain discussion regarding the outstanding debt owed by the Dunfords for $87,000. A ripple of gasps moved through the room. That was the cue Jean had been waiting for. She rose slowly, calm as a lake before sunrise, and spoke into the microphone. "Before we discuss any alleged debt, I'd like to read something into the record." Her voice was clear, deliberate. She held up the parchment deed, its edges yellowed, the text bold and unapologetic. "This document was filed in the county registry on August 21st, 1895. It grants exclusive riparian rights to this property, including all adjoining waterfront up to 50 feet beyond the high water mark. It also states that these rights supersede any future covenants or agreements, including this association, which was founded in 1988. The room went silent. You could almost hear the sound of Karen's composure cracking. In court, Jean presented the 1895 deed and emails proving the HOA's fraud. Karen and the board were exposed. The judge voided all liens and fines, ordered restitution, and referred criminal charges against Karen. From the back of the room, a man stood, Mr. Harland, one of the longest tenured residents. "No. Karen," he said, "you don't get to adjourn when you're the one under investigation." His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried weight. Another resident spoke up. "Is it true? Did you use our dues for this project?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She reached for her phone as if searching for a script that no longer existed. Jean took that moment to slide a flash drive across the table toward the secretary. "All the documentation is here," she said. "Emails, recordings, the video of the trespass, the the confession. Everything. I watched the room transform, control unraveling. Order dissolving. The board members whispered urgently among themselves, faces drained of confidence. Karen tried to regain the floor, but her voice broke mid-sentence. "You're misunderstanding the intent at," she began, only to be cut off by Jean. "No," Jean said softly. "For once. Everyone here understands perfectly." Then she turned to the audience. "We all joined this community to live in peace, not fear, but peace requires truth, and truth demands accountability." When the sheriff's deputies entered the hall 20 minutes later, the sound of their boots on the wooden floor echoed like punctuation. The room parted in silence. They approached the front, speaking quietly with the board's treasurer. Karen stood rigid, face frozen, clipboard pressed to her chest. One deputy handed her a folded document. I couldn't read the words from where I stood, but I recognized the Seal County warrant. Karen's lips moved soundlessly. Her pearl necklace caught the light as she was led toward the door, the crowd parting like the tide. She didn't resist, but she didn't look back either. After she was gone, the hall remained hushed, as though sound itself was cautious. Jean gathered the papers and placed them neatly back into the folder. The board, stunned, adjourned the meeting without a word. Outside, the air was cool and clear, the storm from earlier days washed away. As we walked toward our truck, residents began to follow us, first a few, then more, until half the community was standing in the parking lot. Someone started clapping. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it grew, spreading through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. It wasn't a celebration. It was relief. That night, back at the house, the lake reflected the stars with glassy stillness. The air smelled of cedar and rain, a mix of peace and exhaustion. Jean sat on the steps, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You think it's over?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said, "but the truth has a way of finishing what it starts." She nodded, eyes on the water, then let it finish. For a while, we said nothing. The house behind us glowed warm, steady, alive, the same home they had tried to erase. And for the first time in months, the silence felt like freedom. The courthouse sat on the edge of Rain County, an old sandstone building with tall windows and a clock that had stopped keeping time sometime in the 1970s. Inside, it smelled of dust, varnish, and quiet arguments. Jean and I sat in the front row, the air thick with that strange calm that comes right before consequence. Karen was already there with her attorney, a man in an expensive gray suit whose confidence seemed to dim the moment he looked toward the bench. The judge, Eleanor Miller, entered without fanfare. She was small, silver-haired, and carried herself with the quiet weight of someone who had long ago lost patience for theatrics. She didn't look like a woman who tolerated liars. When the clerk read the case title, Rain Cove Homeowners Association versus Lane and Jean Dunford, the irony of it all nearly made me laugh. We hadn't filed this suit. Karen had. She wanted the court to validate her lien and declare us in default. But as the weeks had passed, investigations had turned the tide, and the countersuit from the county prosecutor had flipped the courtroom into an entirely different story. Now it was her on the defensive, her paper empire collapsing one forged signature at a time. Jean leaned toward me and whispered, "Watch her hands. She always clenches them when she lies." She was right. Karen's fingers were white against the polished table before the opening statement even began. The prosecutor's presentation was methodical. He started with the fines each violation letter shown, compared to the actual bylaws, and disproven. Then came the lien instincteur by any verified treasurer, dated before the board's supposed vote. A forgery. Finally, the email's lines of text, too careless to deny. "Once we secure the Dunford parcel, Sterling will move forward with Phase 2. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. When the prosecutor rested his case, Karen's attorney stood slowly, flipping through papers that suddenly seemed like relics from a lost world. His argument, something about administrative misunderstanding, fell apart within minutes. Then Jean took the stand. She spoke plainly, without dramatics, her tone steady as she described 10 years of building, of paying dues, of receiving nothing but hostility in return. She described the trespass, the threats, the night of the storm, when she produced the deed from 1895. The parchment lay across the evidence table like a piece of living history. Judge Miller adjusted her glasses and studied the wording carefully. "This predates the HOA by nearly a century," she said. The prosecutor nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, which means their entire claim to regulatory authority over the Dunford property is invalid." Karen's lawyer began to object, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand. When the defense's turn came, Karen finally spoke. Her voice, once smooth and commanding, trembled. She tried to explain the emails as misunderstood coordination, the fines as standard procedure, the lien as clerical oversight. Each excuse landed flat, echoing in the hollow space between arrogance and accountability. At one point she said, "I was only protecting the aesthetic integrity of our community." The judge's eyebrow lifted just slightly. By sending men to dismantle a dock during a thunderstorm, Karen's mouth opened, but no words followed. The silence that settled afterward was the kind that marks the end of power. The judgment came swiftly. Judge Miller's ruling was detailed, decisive, and devastating. The lien void, the debt fabricated, the fines fraudulent. She ordered immediate expungement of all HOA filings against our property and awarded restitution for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress, the total sum $120,000. Then, in language so sharp it could cut steel, she declared that the Rain Cove Homeowners Association had abused its charter, violated state property law, and engaged in systematic fraud. The entire board was dissolved pending criminal investigation. Karen was personally fined $10,000 for filing frivolous and fraudulent legal documents. Her attorney stood frozen, eyes on the floor, but Judge Miller wasn't finished. "As for Mrs. Lucas," she continued, "this court refers her conduct to the county district attorney for review under statutes regarding falsification of financial documents and conspiracy to commit fraud." The words hung in the air like thunder. Karen's expression collapsed, not anger, not defiance, but disbelief. For a long moment, she simply sat there, the weight of her certainty turning to dust. Then she was escorted out, head bowed, pearls dim under the courthouse lights. Jean exhaled softly beside me. "It's done," she whispered. I took her hand. "No," I said. "It's finished for her. For us. It's beginning again. Outside." The afternoon sun hit the courthouse steps like a blessing. Reporters hovered near the parking lot, but Jean ignored them, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. We drove home in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. The lake appeared through the trees as we neared our property still. Endless, honest. The house looked different now, though nothing had changed physically. It wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was proof. Proof that patience, truth, and documentation could outlast the loudest form of deceit. When we stepped out of the truck, the air smelled of cedar and rain, like it had the day we finished rebuilding. In the weeks that followed, the community transformed, without Karen's shadow. The fear that had clung to Rain Cove began to lift. Neighbors we'd never spoken to stopped by to apologize, to share coffee, to offer help repairing the damage the HOA had left behind. Someone repainted the community sign, removing the words "Property of Rain Cove Association" and replacing them with "Welcome to Rain Cove Lake." The first time I saw it, I laughed out loud. Jean called it poetic justice, simple, understated, permanent. The county restored our deed record to its original status, free of encumbrance. Sterling Development quietly withdrew its project proposal. Later, we learned that several other homeowners had joined the class action suit against the HOA, citing similar harassment. The ripples of the judgment spread outward, each one erasing a little more of what Karen had built. Jean and I focused on quieter things. She started painting again small landscapes of the lake, of storms and reflections. I rebuilt the dock section they'd damaged, stronger than before, sealing the wood until it gleamed under the afternoon sun. One evening, as the water turned silver in the fading light, Jean sat beside me on the dock. "Do you ever think about selling?" she asked. I smiled. "Sell," I said. "After all this?" "Never." She laughed softly, resting her head on my shoulder. "I thought you'd say that." The wind moved gently across the lake, rustling the cattails, carrying the faint sound of children playing somewhere across the shore. For the first time in years, Rain Cove sounded alive again. That night, I walked out alone after Jean went inside. The moon hung low, full and heavy, and the lake mirrored it perfectly. I looked at our reflection house, dock, and water merging into one, and thought about what the past year had taken, and what it had given back. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives in quiet nights like this, when peace feels earned rather than borrowed. The world had tried to price what we built, to measure it in dollars and signatures. But there are things beyond value, like the feeling of standing on solid ground you refused to surrender. The sign at the edge of the property now reads, "Welcome to the Joyful Dock." Jean carved the letters herself. Every morning, sunlight touched them first before reaching the house. Sometimes, when I see that, I think about Karen's final words in court, something about misunderstanding her intentions. Maybe she believed that. Maybe power always sounds like a misunderstanding when it loses its audience. Either way, the lake doesn't care. It just reflects whatever truth you stand in front of it with. And ours, at last, was simple. We had kept our promise. Over the following weeks, peace returned, neighbors smiled, repairs were made, and the lake reflected the calm we had fought to protect. The dock bore the new sign, "Welcome to the Joyful Dock," carved by Jean herself. She says it helps her remember what patience looks like in color. I still work on small repairs around the house, fixing things that no longer need fixing, just to feel the grain of the wood beneath my hands. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I hear the faint creak of the old dock and think of that stormy night, of lightning striking water, of how close we came to losing it all. But the fear fades quickly, replaced by a sense of awe, because survival, when earned, feels like grace. In the evenings, we sit outside and watch the sky catch fire over the lake. The reflection turns the world upside down. Trees floating in gold, clouds sinking into blue. Jean leans against my shoulder, and neither of us speaks. There's nothing left to argue with, nothing left to defend, only gratitude, the kind that doesn't shout but hums quietly beneath the surface, like the slow rhythm of waves against wood. I think of the people who tried to measure this place in dollars and covenants, and I feel almost sorry for them. You can price land, but you can't buy peace. When night falls, the lights from our house shimmer faintly on the water. The sign by the dock reads, "Welcome to the Joyful Dock," the letters glowing softly under the porch lantern. Jean carved them after the trial, saying the dock deserved a name that felt like healing. Now it stands as a reminder that laughter outlasts cruelty, and truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its reflection. The lake has forgiven everything. Maybe we have, too. Tomorrow the sun will rise again, catching the same water, the same cedar, the same promise we made a decade ago. And this time, nothing will come to take it away. If Lane and Jean's story of patience, courage, and standing up to injustice inspired you, don't let it end here. Join the gated drama community to uncover more tales of resilience and triumph. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that truth and persistence always win. Subscribe to witness the full journey of ordinary people achieving extraordinary justice. And keep these lessons alive in your own life. Take action. Let courage echo beyond these pages.